I'd like to take a moment, as many people have, to just acknowledge the void that is left by the death of our friend Hitch. While it might be possible to guess what he would have thought about a number of the topics raised here, it's almost impossible to imagine how well he would have expressed those thoughts. The man had more wit and style and substance than a few civilizations I could name.
And the truth is, I think it would be a terrible thing if the President of the United States suddenly started speaking the way I speak. I mean, the President cannot get up and say, "We're at war with Islam, I got news for you." But we need a clear appraisal of our situation in the world. And I don't hear that appraisal coming from religious moderates and religious liberals. And I don't see the purchase point theologically where they can stand and say, "Listen, guys, you have it wrong because your interpretation is false." Because that's really what it is. There's nothing more sacred than the facts. There's nothing more sacred than the truth. And we have rival conceptions of what is true. Religious fundamentalists really think that God is letting people fly planes into our buildings because we're tolerating gay marriage. Okay, so it seems to me that to combat that, you really need a place to stand where you can argue about how unseemly that view of the world is, in logical terms, in factual terms, and in moral terms. And this is where I think you're going, and this is really where I can meet you halfway. I think there is a huge role for people who talk the talk you talk. I mean, that my language is not really fashioned for export very well. And we need religious moderates who find some way to articulate the traditional game of religion in ways that are not offensive to reason and in ways that do not distort our social policy. But it has to be much more radical than it seems to be. And, it's a real challenge. I am someone who wrote this book and gives talks like this really without any hope that I'm going to make a bit of difference. I mean, there's just I just can't. These are the noises I make when I open my mouth, but it's not based on any expectation that it's really going to change the world in any sense at all. That point of not knowing what happens after death is what worries me about this conversation. I've been very worried about this, that all of you have given up a perfectly serviceable Tuesday evening only to hear the four of us tell you every which way that we have no idea what happens after death. Well, I expressed the spirit of my wife, and she was actually able to put me at ease. I'm worried, obviously, about boring all of you, and she said, "Nothing Hitchens does is ever boring." So I have that going for me. Right. I think we should think about what this concept of the afterlife does. We'll talk about the plausible versions of it and how implausible some of the traditional ones are. But I think, just to give some context, we're living in a world in which 9 million children every year die before they reach the age of 5. Okay, year after year after year. I mean, that is an Asian-style tsunami of the sort you remember from 2004 every 10 days. Killing only children before the age of 5. I mean, think about these children, think about their parents, know that virtually all of these parents are people who believe in God and were praying all the while that their children would be saved. And their prayers were not answered. Now, the afterlife comes into the midst of this reality. And as a promise that all of this is going to make sense in the end, that somehow at the end of existence we're going to be all let in on the punchline and have a mighty laugh with Almighty God for eternity. Now, there's no evidence of that, and I think, therefore, this concept of the afterlife really functions as a substitute for wisdom. It functions as a substitute for really absorbing our predicament, which is that everyone is going to die. There are circumstances that are just catastrophically unfair. Evil sometimes wins, and injustice sometimes wins. And the only justice we're going to find in the world is the justice we make. And I think we have an ethical responsibility to absorb this really down to the soles of our feet. And this notion of an afterlife, that the happy talk about how it's all going to work out and it's all part of God's plan, is a way of shirking that responsibility.
To not believe in God is to know that it falls to us to make the world a better place. We have barely emerged from centuries of barbarism. It's not a surprise that there are shocking inequities in this world. It is hard work to climb down out of the trees, walk upright, and build a viable global civilization when you start with technology that's made of rocks and sticks and fur. This is a project, and progress is difficult. Just picture going back 100 generations within your own family. I mean, just picture it kind of mapped onto this room, maybe this front row. Just 100 people. Your father's fathers, mother's fathers, mother's fathers' fathers, on back. Now, I don't care how cultured you are, how well-educated your family. You can be Matthew Chapman, whose great-great-grandfather was Charles Darwin. But if you just keep going, in no more than 100 conversations, you are going to meet someone who thinks that sacrificing your firstborn child just might be a good way to control the weather. It is. Some of you probably don't have to go back quite that far. You just have to go home for Christmas. It's true that some people define God as pure consciousness, or as being synonymous with the laws of nature. But if we talk about consciousness and the laws of nature, we won't be talking about the God that most of our neighbors believe in, which is a personal God who hears our prayers and occasionally answers them. So I just want you to be sensitive to this, because if Michael or I say something derogatory about Islam or Christianity, which seems possible, the response from the other side shouldn't mention quantum mechanics. And it shouldn't reference a notion of God that is so denuded of doctrine as to more or less be synonymous with pure mystery or pure information or pure energy or pure anything. So I wanted to plant a flag there where you all can see it, because the God that our neighbors believe in is essentially an invisible person. It's a creator deity who created the universe to have a relationship with one species of primate. Lucky us. and he's got galaxy upon galaxy to attend to. But he's especially concerned with what we do, and he's especially concerned with what we do while naked. And he almost certainly disapproves of homosexuality, and he's created this cosmos as a vast laboratory in which to test our powers of credulity. And the test is this: can you believe in this God on bad evidence, which is to say on faith? And if you can, you will win an eternity of happiness after you die. And it's precisely this sort of God and this sort of scheme that you must believe in if you're going to have any kind of future in politics in this country. No matter what your gifts. I mean, you could be an unprecedented genius. You could look like George Clooney. You could have $1 billion, and you could have the social skills of Oprah, and you are going nowhere in politics in this country unless you believe in that sort of God.
The question about Sweden and Western Europe in general is interesting. There are some theories about it. I don't know what really explains it. One theory is that when you have state religions, when you have no marketplace that requires the competition among denominations, then religion kind of gets ossified and uncharismatic, and people stop going to church. Whereas here we have this marketplace of religions, and everyone is hanging up a shingle, and then you have this vibrant ecosystem of ignorance. To mix metaphors carefully.
Thank you.
But I'm not entirely satisfied with that hypothesis about Western Europe.
But the problem is that without God, and without a promise of an eternal existence after death, life appears to be an emergency. It's a long emergency for many of us, but it is an emergency. You can't help but notice that things are going very wrong in this place. I mean, no matter how much fun you are having, a glance at a newspaper will show you that it's possible to have no fun at all. Okay? And everyone seems to have a run of bad luck in the end. Now, it's hard not to see the absurdity of this situation. You unwrap your shiny new iPad, upon which you hope to squander an unconscionable amount of time and attention, only to discover, perhaps on the iPad itself, that the people who built this gorgeous device live lives of such unendurable drudgery that they regularly hurl themselves off the rooftops at the factory where they work. Nets have been installed to catch their falling bodies. Is there any sense to be made of disparities in luck of this kind? Religion makes sense of it. It's my karma. It's God's will that I'm so lucky. If God had wanted me to do dangerous and deadly boring work for a few dollars a day, that's what I would be doing. But as it happens, he wants me to have a new iPad. Hallelujah.
You can make a philosophically respectable argument that consciousness could survive the death of the brain. It's by no means the majority opinion in neuroscience or philosophy that it would. For instance, there's a philosopher at Oxford, Nick Bostrom. This is one of the weirder arguments, but still more plausible than the arguments you get from religion. Nick, there's actually very little you have to assume to make this seem somewhat robust. The argument is called the simulation argument, and he argues that we are all very likely not living in a real universe, but living in a simulated universe. And we are being simulated on the hard drives of computers of the future. Now he gets there with a few simple steps. You simply have to acknowledge that consciousness is at bottom the result of information processing at the level of the brain, and there's nothing magical about brains. It could be information processing in a computer of the future. Most scientists think that's true. They don't think there's anything magical about the wet stuff in our heads, and that consciousness is at some point going to be instantiated in computers. Then you simply have to grant that humans of the future will run simulations of the past in the way that we run simulations, Sims games, and then there's just one short move, that simulated universes, almost by definition, will outnumber real universes. And therefore we are a lot more likely to be among the simulated ancestors than the real ancestors. Now again, this everyone acknowledges it seems a little crazy, but the assumptions that you take on board are not so weak. And I would add to this the somewhat disconcerting idea that if in fact we are running as a simulation on a computer of the future, this computer could have been built by Mormons or Scientologists who would want to simulate the truth of their religion. And therefore all religions could be true in this simulated universe, and we could expect to see Jesus coming back on clouds of glory and moving to Missouri as the Mormons expect. So now all of that sounds completely crazy, but it is not as crazy as the version of the afterlife that is really on offer traditionally, which has been actually neatly sidestepped here because it entails the resurrection of the dead. Most people think that the afterlife religion is offering, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, has something to do with the soul floating off the brain into a tunnel of light and into paradise. But that's actually not the canonical afterlife. The canonical afterlife is God has to do the humble work of reassembling us. And I don't want to take more than my allotted time here, but I think we should talk about just how implausible that vision is, because that actually is the vision of Judaism and Christianity and Islam.
So this is an extraordinary circumstance we're in. We have certain religious beliefs leading to the most nihilistic violence. What could be more nihilistic than blowing yourself up in a crowd of children and having your mother approve of it? This is the situation we're in. Now, I really want to nail this down because many of you are very likely still to believe, no, Islam is a religion of peace. These are economic and political issues. This is a result of the misadventures of American foreign policy. America has a tremendous amount to apologize for in the world. There is no doubt. But this is a separate issue. There is no possibility that we will ever have a problem with Jain suicide bombers. Insofar as a Jain becomes more and more religious, even more and more deranged by his religious dogmas, he will become less and less violent. The doctrine of Jainism is a doctrine of total pacifism. Jains drink every sip of water, observant Jains drink every sip of water through cheesecloth so that they won't swallow a bug. They sweep the path upon which they walk so that they won't step on ants. They can scarcely figure out how to live in this world. They're so nonviolent. So if you don't think religion is the difference that makes a difference, you